There's a person you still think about, not occasionally, but repeatedly, involuntarily, intimately. You've tried to move on. Logic tells you it's over. Time insists you should feel differently by now. Friends call it obsession. You start believing them. But deep down, something doesn't add up, because what you feel isn't just longing. It's presence. A presence that lives inside you, like a song that began years ago and never really ended. You're not obsessed. You're entangled, emotionally, symbolically, energetically. The connection lingers not because you're stuck, but because something sacred was left unresolved. Carl Jung called these moments numinous, emotionally charged experiences that pierce the ego and ignite the soul. The psyche doesn't treat them as memories. It treats them as living symbols. And according to Greg Braden, the heart is more than a metaphor. It generates an electromagnetic field that can store emotional resonance. When the heart encounters coherence, when emotion, truth, and presence align, that pattern becomes encoded. The body remembers it as home. This is why certain memories feel alive, why you can't explain the weight of that connection. It's not pathology, it's meaning. You're not caught in the past. You're still living in a moment your soul refuses to archive, because to your deeper self, that moment still holds a key. So what if this isn't obsession at all? What if it's your soul trying to retrieve the version of you that was awakened, in that connection, in that moment, in that sacred memory? There are connections that don't dissolve, even when the relationship has ended. Time folds itself around the memory, but never quite carries it away. Days pass, lives change, but the ache returns in waves. Sudden, wordless, private. You may have hidden it from others. You've tried to reason it out, tried to replace it, spiritualize it, or silence it, but it remains quiet, patient, and deeply alive. The modern world has given names to this kind of lingering: obsession, codependency, emotional addiction. These labels promise clarity, but often deliver shame. They assume the presence of pain is a sign of failure, that if you were truly healed, you wouldn't still feel. But Carl Jung offers something far more truthful and far more unsettling. He wrote that the unconscious holds on to what the ego refuses to integrate. When a moment or a person imprints the psyche with symbolic significance, it cannot be discarded like a passing thought. It becomes part of the inner myth. The ache is not weakness. It is a signal, a mark of something left incomplete in the emotional body, something too sacred, too alive to be discarded like a lesson. Perhaps it was the way the relationship ended, too fast, too unspoken. Or perhaps it was something that never quite began. A kiss withheld, a truth unsaid, a part of you that emerged in their presence but was never brought fully into the world. So the unconscious paints the same scene again and again. It shows up in your dreams, in the unexpected return of their name, in the moment your breath catches when someone walks past wearing their scent. It isn't madness, it's memory, not of events, but of emotional realities left unresolved. Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." This ache is the unconscious trying to speak, not about the person, but about the part of you that was never fully seen, never fully claimed, never fully named. It's like an unfinished painting. The artist walks away, but the image calls out in sleep, not to torment, but to remind. The work isn't done, the colors still wait. And the soul, like the artist, cannot forget the vision it once began. What lingers is not always a person. Sometimes it's a force, an atmosphere, a feeling that once wrapped itself around your nervous system and whispered something you hadn't heard in years or ever. You think it's them you miss, their voice, their presence, their body. But when you trace the ache all the way back, what emerges is subtler. It's not the facts of the relationship. It's the feeling state you entered when you were with them. Jung taught that we are rarely in relationship with a person alone. We are in relationship with an archetype, a symbolic figure that carries psychic energy. They may have embodied the lover, the savior, the destroyer, the muse, and in them, that energy became visible, tangible, alive. The connection became charged. But not because they were your perfect match. It's because they carried the emotional resonance of something your soul had long been waiting to meet. This is why the longing continues, not because of who they were, but because of what they represented. They arrived carrying an emotional frequency that mirrored a forgotten part of your mythic self. Gregg Braden speaks of energetic coherence, a moment where the inner and outer world align with extraordinary emotional clarity. In that space, something ancient is remembered. That's what they gave you, not permanence, but coherence, not a future, but a glimpse, a temporary fusion between your everyday self and something far more symbolic. And now, the body longs for that frequency again, not as dependency, but as recognition. Like Eros visiting Psyche only in the dark, fleeting, overwhelming, gone by morning. And yet, something irreversible has occurred. It isn't them that you search for in others. It's that energy, that feeling, that moment when the sacred inside you was awakened by the symbolic outside you. They were a mirror, yes, but also a door, a portal into your own myth. And once opened, that door can never fully close. There are certain connections that pass through you like lightning. You may forget the conversations, the logic, the stories, but your body doesn't forget the electricity. Even now you might wake up with a strange ache, a pull in the chest, a quickening when their name appears in the corner of your mind. The memory is no longer just emotional. It has become physical. This wasn't an ordinary interaction. It left an imprint, not just in the heart, but in the field around it. Gregg Braden reminds us that the human heart generates an electromagnetic field capable of encoding emotional resonance. What we feel deeply, we don't just remember, we store. The nervous system holds on to coherence, the way a melody clings to its final note. So when that person looked at you in that particular way, when you shared that moment that felt suspended outside of time, something happened. Your system recorded it, not in your timeline, but in your tissue. The world tells you that you're addicted to them. But addiction implies a chemical repetition of pleasure. What you're experiencing is the trace of a sacred coherence. Something in their presence aligned with something in you. And now without it, you feel off-key. You may crave intensity. You may struggle to feel fully alive in your current life. It's not necessarily because you want them back. It's because your body is still vibrating at the frequency they once activated. Carl Jung would have called this a psychic imprint, the symbolic remains of an archetypal encounter. It's like a violin string that once vibrated in perfect resonance. The bow is long gone, the concert has ended, but the string still hums, faintly, faithfully. This is the echo of coherence, not dysfunction, not dependence. The body remembers when it was in the presence of something that felt like home, and that memory becomes a sacred residue, not to bind you, but to remind you of how deeply you can still feel. The mind has its own way of remembering. It organizes, narrates, rationalizes. It marks time in hours and years. It believes in closure. But the soul remembers differently. It does not measure time in minutes or calendars. It measures in depth, in symbolic weight, in emotional truth. This is why a memory can return after years in full color, with full feeling, not as nostalgia, but as presence. Because for the soul, that moment never ended. You might say, it's been so long. Why do I still feel this? The answer is not in the mind. It's in the soul's refusal to archive what it considers sacred. Carl Jung saw the unconscious as a symbolic realm, a timeless space where memories are not just images, but living forces. If a moment carried archetypal energy, if it pierced you with meaning, it becomes a living image. It does not dissolve. It waits. And so you live with a kind of inner haunting, not a ghost of the person, but a vibration, like an unopened letter sealed inside your chest. You may forget the envelope, the ink, the handwriting, but the message pulses, not yet read, not yet resolved. Greg Braden's work reminds us that emotional coherence leaves an imprint in the field, not in thought, but in frequency. And the soul, tuned to that frequency, continues to listen for it. This is why you can be suddenly overtaken by emotion at the sound of a song, the curve of a street, the scent of a particular perfume. It's not memory as the mind defines it. It's memory as the soul carries it. Vivid, undissolved, alive. The soul does not forget what mattered. It holds it not in the past, but in a sacred present, waiting not to torment you, but to be received. The mind may want to move on, but the soul stays until it is seen, until the memory is not just remembered, but understood, until the letter is finally opened. There are people who enter our lives not to complete us, but to reveal us. And in their presence, something inside us opens, suddenly, surprisingly. A part we had long forgotten or perhaps had never known. A version of ourselves that feels more alive, more vivid, more essential. It's tempting to believe it was because they saw us, that their gaze was what made us real. But what if it wasn't their gaze that revealed us? What if it was the mirror they unknowingly became? Carl Jung spoke of projection as the unconscious reaching out to see itself. In their presence, the projection wasn't an illusion. It was a portal. They became the symbolic surface onto which the deepest self could appear. And now, long after they're gone, it's not just them you miss. It's you. The you that emerged in their company, the you that laughed without armor, that touched the world without flinching, that felt deeply, recklessly, truthfully. Greg Braden might say that coherence isn't just about resonance between hearts, but within. That moment when you felt at home in yourself wasn't because of them alone. It was because their presence allowed you to come into resonance with your own being. So now you search for that feeling again, in others, in memories, in longing. But it isn't about reuniting with them. It's about reclaiming the part of you that still lives in that emotional dimension. They were the container, but the light, that was always yours. Like a candle that remembers only burning in their flame. But in truth, the fire came from within. And the longing is not for the flame itself, but for the self that once dared to burn. Some stories never got the chance to begin. Others ended too suddenly, mid-sentence, mid-silence, mid-becoming. And the psyche doesn't forget unfinished rituals. It isn't just heartbreak that lingers. It's the disorientation of a door that closed without a final goodbye. The mind may try to explain it away, but the soul, which speaks in symbols and stories, registers a fracture. Something sacred was interrupted. Obsession in this light is not a flaw. It is the alarm of the symbolic self. A call from the unconscious. Something meaningful has not yet been witnessed. Jung understood the danger of severing psychic bonds too quickly, too cleanly, too intellectually. He wrote that the psyche resists when symbolic closure is denied. If a bond carried archetypal energy, even briefly, it cannot be cut through will alone. And Greg Braden reminds us, the heart's field stores what the mind cannot process. The emotional resonance of a sacred encounter doesn't vanish when the person leaves. It lingers in the body, in the field, in the dreamscape. That is why even the strongest efforts to move on can be met with strange resistance, repeating signs, echoes in music, dreams that feel more alive than waking life. It is not sentimentality. It is the psyche refusing to close what was never truly opened. Somewhere inside you, a symbolic thread is still weaving the unfinished chapter. You may not know what needs to be said, only that something was not said. It is like a love spell cast unconsciously, not in the way of magic, but in the way of emotional intensity that lingers like an echo. And that echo will not fade through denial nor through distraction. It asks to be met, not through the person, but through ritual, through reflection, through the sacred act of listening to the ache. What you are feeling is not failure. It is a sign that the sacred cycle is still alive. Not to bind you, but to ask for meaning. The meaning that can only emerge when you stop trying to sever and start trying to see. Did you enjoy the content and it made a difference for you? Click on Super Thanks and support our work. Not all soul encounters arrive with longevity. Some last only a breath, a single season, a sudden hour, or an unfinished gaze. But what they lack in permanence, they often compensate for in depth. You may still carry the memory as if it happened yesterday, not because you are holding on, but because something eternal happened in the briefness. The mind argues, if it was real, it would have lasted. But the soul speaks differently. The soul remembers the moment not as a timeline, but as a threshold. Something opened, something was seen. Carl Jung described these moments as breakthroughs of the archetypal. They occur when a deeper layer of self is activated, when the unconscious reveals something luminous, not through words, but through presence. And sometimes it takes only a few hours for that recognition to change everything. You may never see them again. You may have spoken only once, but what you felt wasn't about the future. It was about a mirror that revealed you to yourself suddenly, without expectation. Greg Braden would say that these soul encounters imprint a resonance, a pattern of emotional coherence that does not require years to register as sacred. The experience becomes cellular, timeless. This is why forgetting feels impossible, not because of fantasy, but because a part of you was awakened, and that awakening is irreversible. It's like a comet that passed through your sky. You didn't catch it, you didn't follow it, but for one night, your entire sky lit up. And now, when the sky goes dark, the memory returns, not to torment but to remind. Not every soul connection is meant to stay, but some are meant to awaken. And even if the person vanished, the fire they sparked lives on as proof that you were, for a moment, fully seen by something greater than both of you. There's a moment in every soul journey where clarity and confusion walk hand in hand. You know something meaningful happened, you feel changed, but you can't quite name what was taken or what was given. You return to the memory again and again, not out of weakness, but because something inside it still breathes. The story is unfinished, not in the outer world, but in the symbolic one. Jung understood the psyche as a living myth in motion. He saw emotional intensity not as disorder, but as initiation, the longing, the recurring thoughts, the dreams that won't quiet. These are signs that you are still inside the story, not outside of it. And Greg Braden reminds us, the heart remembers patterns of deep coherence. Until that pattern is integrated, it remains active, not to punish, but to complete. You're not broken for still caring. You're not irrational for still wondering. You are simply moving through the center of a psychic spiral, one that cannot be rushed nor bypassed. It's not linear, it's labyrinthine. And like in every sacred labyrinth, the path feels circular before it becomes clear. You may pass the same memories, the same aches, the same doubts, again and again. But each time, you are a little different. Each return is not repetition, it is revelation. You are not circling in error. You are orbiting a truth that has not yet come fully into form. It is not the memory that wants to be held. It is the meaning. You are not obsessed. You are still inside a living cycle, a sacred passage. And the longing that stays with you is not a flaw. It is the thread that guides you back to something essential. Not about them, but about you. You are not lost. You are becoming. This was never about obsession. That word is too small for what lives inside you, too clinical for something so tender, so mythic, so charged with meaning. What you're experiencing is not a fixation, but a signal, a living thread woven through time, emotion, and soul memory. You are not stuck in the past. You are mid-initiation, moving through the symbolic underworld of a story that asked to change you. This person, this moment, this ache, they were never meant to be forgotten like ordinary events. They entered your psyche not as a visitor, but as a guide. Carl Jung taught that what remains unconscious becomes fate, and perhaps this lingering memory is not here to bind you, but to awaken you. Greg Braden reminds us that the heart stores what the mind cannot resolve. It remembers wholeness, resonance, emotional truth. So maybe this memory isn't here to be erased. Maybe it's here to be understood. Because you're not carrying the past. You're carrying a part of yourself that was awakened within it. A part that was real. That felt something sacred. And now you're being invited not to relive it, not to chase it, but to receive it. Not just the memory, but the meaning. Because this happened. This marked you. And something in you is still unfolding, quietly, sacredly, through the echo of that encounter.